My father looked me straight in the eye and called me uneducated trash who'll never amount to anything without a college degree. I was 19, crying at our family dinner table, trying to explain why I needed to drop out of college to start my business. Mom nodded along. My siblings, Thomas and Jennifer, smirked from across the table like they were watching their parents discipline a misbehaving child. Real careers require real education. Dad continued cutting into his steak like he was cutting me out of the family. You want to play business? Do it somewhere else. We didn't raise a quitter. They kicked me out that night, packed my bags while I slept, left them by the front door with a note saying I was no longer welcome until I came to my senses about the importance of education. I was homeless at 19 because I chose entrepreneurship over a business degree they couldn't afford anyway. Thomas, the golden child engineer, laughed when I begged them to reconsider. Good luck in the real world without credentials, he said. Jennifer, the MBA princess, added, maybe this will teach you that shortcuts don't work in adult life. But 3 years later, when my face appeared on the cover of Business Insider as Visionary Entrepreneur of the Year for building Heartland, made into a $20 million company, their tune changed completely. Suddenly the phone rang every day with apologies, explanations, and not-so-subtle hints about Dad's retirement crisis and Mom's medical bills. The uneducated trash they'd discarded was now their only hope of financial salvation. And I had some very specific plans for Dad's upcoming 60th birthday party. But they'd forgotten one crucial detail about the daughter they'd thrown away. Growing up in the Peterson household meant one thing above all else: education was religion, and degrees were your ticket to heaven. Dad William had worked his way up from construction to middle management with his business degree. Mom Patricia taught elementary school and treated her teaching certificate like a crown jewel. Every conversation at dinner revolved around academic achievement. Thomas got another A in calculus. Jennifer made Dean's List again. Did you know the Johnson boy got into Harvard Law? College brochures covered our coffee table like holy scriptures. SAT prep books were birthday gifts. The message was clear. Smart people go to college, successful people get degrees, and anyone who doesn't follow that path is destined for failure. They had Thomas's engineering degree framed in the living room before he even graduated. Jennifer's MBA acceptance letter was photographed and sent to relatives. When neighbors asked about their kids, Mom would beam about her engineer son and MBA daughter like she was announcing royalty. Education was everything in our house except common sense. Thomas landed a corporate engineering job straight out of college, designing components for manufacturing equipment. Dad couldn't stop bragging about his salary and benefits package. Jennifer got hired at a financial consulting firm after her MBA, wearing power suits and carrying briefcases that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Family gatherings became showcases for their achievements. Thomas would explain complex engineering problems at dinner while Dad nodded knowingly. Jennifer would discuss market trends and investment strategies while Mom praised her brilliant business mind. They were the success stories, the proof that the Peterson family formula worked. I was the one who fixed things when they broke, who figured out why the computer wasn't working, who helped neighbors with their small business problems. But those weren't real skills in my parents' eyes. Those were just hobbies, distractions from what really mattered: getting a degree and finding a real career. My siblings had degrees, I had ideas they called worthless. While Thomas studied engineering theory, I was already running small businesses in high school. I sold custom t-shirts for school events, organized tutoring services, even started a small landscaping operation with friends. I made more money as a teenager than most adults in our neighborhood, but my parents saw it as playing around instead of preparing for my future. When I got to college, they insisted I major in business administration. If you want to run companies, you need to understand how they work, Mom said. But sitting in lecture halls learning about theories I was already applying felt like torture. I knew how to read financial statements because I'd been managing my own books for years. I understood marketing because I'd been doing it since I was 16. The business opportunity that changed everything came during my sophomore year. A local artisan wanted help scaling her handmade goods business, and I saw the potential for an entire platform connecting small-town makers with national markets. It wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real, immediate, and profitable. They wanted me to study business, not actually do it. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening in October my sophomore year. I'd spent the weekend working on the business plan for what would eventually become Heartland Made, and I was excited to share it with my family. The artisan marketplace concept was solid, the numbers made sense, and I already had 3 local makers ready to sign on. I waited until dessert to bring it up, thinking the timing would soften the blow. I've been presented with an incredible business opportunity. I began pulling out the folder with my research. There's a gap in this market for authentic handmade goods from small-town artisans, and I've figured out how to connect them with national buyers through an online platform. Dad looked up from his coffee. That sounds like a nice project for after you graduate. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk about. The opportunity is time-sensitive. If I'm going to make this work, I need to start now, while the market is still open. I'm thinking of taking a leave of absence from college to focus on building the company. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom set down her fork. Thomas and Jennifer exchanged those looks that said they were about to witness a family meltdown. I thought they'd understand the business opportunity I'd found. Amanda, absolutely not, Mom said, her teacher voice kicking in. You have 1 year left of college. 1 year. You can play with your little business ideas after you have your degree to fall back on. But this isn't playing around. I insisted, showing them the financial projections. I've run the numbers. This could be generating 6-figure revenue within 18 months. Dad's face was turning red. Do you have any idea how naive you sound? Every college dropout thinks they've discovered the next big thing. The difference is smart people finish school first. I've been running successful businesses since high school. Those weren't businesses. He cut me off. Those were hobbies. Lawn mowing and t-shirt printing are not careers. They're what people do when they can't cut it in the real world. The room felt like it was closing in on me. This wasn't how I'd imagined the conversation going. I don't need a business degree to understand business. I've been doing it for years. That's when Dad exploded. He stood up from the table, pointing his finger at me like I was a criminal. You want to throw away 4 years of education and $40,000 in tuition to sell crafts online? You want to embarrass this family by becoming a college dropout, fine. But you won't do it under my roof. His voice got louder with each word. We didn't sacrifice everything to give you opportunities just so you could turn into uneducated trash who thinks she's too good for school. Mom was nodding along. Thomas was smirking, and Jennifer looked like she was enjoying the show. Dad called me uneducated trash, who'd never amount to anything. The next morning, my bags were packed and sitting by the front door when I woke up. Dad had already left for work, probably to avoid another confrontation. Mom was in the kitchen making coffee like nothing had happened. Your father and I talked last night, she said without looking at me. We've decided that if you want to make adult decisions, you need to live with adult consequences. We can't support someone who's throwing their future away. Where am I supposed to go? That's not our problem anymore. You're 19. Figure it out. The financial support stopped immediately. The credit card they'd given me for emergencies was canceled. My name was removed from their auto insurance. The money they'd been putting toward my college tuition, gone. The cell phone plan, disconnected. They didn't just kick me out. They systematically erased every connection we'd had. When Thomas graduated with his engineering degree 6 months later, I wasn't invited to the celebration dinner. When Jennifer got promoted at her firm, the family photos from the party showed a conspicuous empty space where I should have been. They erased me like I'd never been their daughter. I ended up sleeping on a friend's couch for 3 weeks, then found a tiny studio apartment I could barely afford, with the money I'd saved from my high school businesses. The first months were brutal. Ramen noodles for dinner most nights, walking everywhere, because I couldn't afford a car, working 3 part-time jobs just to make rent. But every spare moment went into building Heartland Made. I reached out to artisans across the Midwest, explaining my vision for connecting their handmade goods with customers who valued authentic craftsmanship. The first website was basic. I built it myself using free templates and YouTube tutorials. My first sale was a hand-carved wooden bowl from a craftsman in Ohio. $12. I made $3 in commission and felt like I'd conquered the world. By the end of my first year, I had 47 artisans on the platform and was generating enough revenue to quit one of my part-time jobs. The learning curve was steep, but I was learning real business skills: inventory management, customer service, digital marketing, financial planning. Not from textbooks, but from actual experience, actual mistakes, actual successes. Every rejection taught me what my family never could. Meanwhile, my siblings were still living at home, still getting their bills paid, still being celebrated for their traditional achievements. Thomas landed a promotion at his engineering firm and got a company car. Jennifer moved to a bigger apartment downtown, with Mom and Dad helping with the security deposit. When I tried to share my small victories through our cousin Sarah, my first $1,000 month landing my 50th artisan, getting featured in a local newspaper, the response was always the same dismissive comments filtered back through the family network. Amanda's still playing with her little crafts business. Mom would tell relatives at family gatherings I was no longer invited to. We keep hoping she'll come to her senses and finish college. Dad's favorite line, according to Sarah, was, "Real careers require real degrees. Everything else is just pretending to be an adult." Even when I hit my first 5-figure month, when I moved into a better apartment, when I hired my first employee, the family narrative never changed. I wasn't building a real business. I was just a college dropout playing pretend in a world that required credentials they were sure I'd never earn. Success without a degree didn't count in their world. By my 3rd year, Heartland Made had become something even I hadn't fully imagined. What started as a simple platform for 47 artisans had grown into a curated marketplace featuring over 300 makers from across 32 states. We weren't just selling handmade goods anymore. We were telling stories about American craftsmanship, connecting urban consumers with rural traditions, and providing sustainable income for artists who'd been struggling to reach national markets. Our monthly revenue hit 6 figures in month 31. I moved the operation out of my tiny apartment into a real office space, hired 5 full-time employees, and started getting calls from investors who wanted to discuss expansion opportunities. The woman who'd been dismissed as a college dropout playing with crafts was now running a genuine business that employed people and generated real profit. The local business journal featured us as Startup of the Year. A regional magazine did a profile on my journey from college dropout to successful entrepreneur. Each milestone felt like vindication proof that my instincts had been right, even when my family insisted they were wrong. Heartland Made was becoming what they said was impossible. Meanwhile, The golden children weren't doing quite as well as their degrees had promised. Thomas got laid off when his engineering firm downsized, a victim of automation and cost-cutting that made his position redundant. His unemployment benefits barely covered his rent, and he'd moved back in with Mom and Dad while he searched for another position. Jennifer was drowning in MBA debt, $87,000 in student loans, with interest rates that made the monthly payments nearly unmanageable. Her finance job paid well on paper, but after loan payments, rent, and the expensive lifestyle she felt obligated to maintain. In her profession, she was living paycheck to paycheck. The irony was brutal. My siblings, with their prestigious degrees and traditional career paths, were both struggling financially while asking Mom and Dad for help with basic expenses. Thomas needed money for job interview suits. Jennifer needed help with her loan payments when an unexpected medical bill wiped out her emergency fund. The family that had kicked me out for not following the traditional path was now supporting 2 adult children who had followed it perfectly and couldn't support themselves. The college graduates kept asking Mom for money. Dad's retirement crisis became apparent when he had to postpone his planned retirement by 3 years. The pension fund he'd been counting on had been mismanaged and was now worth significantly less than projected. Mom's teacher's pension was modest, and her recent health scare had generated medical bills that insurance didn't fully cover. Nearly $15,000 that had eaten into their savings. They'd planned their retirement around the assumption that their educated children would be financially independent and possibly even able to help support them. Instead, they found themselves supporting 2 struggling adults while trying to figure out how to afford their own golden years. The house they'd been planning to sell to downsize had lost value in the market downturn. Dad's part-time consulting work wasn't generating the income he'd hoped for. Every month brought new financial stress as they tried to balance their own needs with supporting Thomas and Jennifer through their career struggles. The credential-obsessed parents who dismissed practical skills were discovering that degrees don't guarantee financial security, and that the daughter they'd thrown away might have had the right idea all along. Turns out, credentials don't pay medical bills. The call from Business Insider came on a Tuesday morning in March. They wanted to feature Heartland Made in their annual Visionary Entrepreneurs Under 30 issue. The journalist Maria Santos had been tracking our growth for months and was particularly interested in how I'd built the company without traditional business school training. "Your story challenges a lot of assumptions about what it takes to succeed in business," she said during our interview. "Here you are, a college dropout, building something that MBA graduates spend years trying to achieve." The article ran 6 weeks later with my photo on the cover. "The College Dropout, Revolutionizing American Craftsmanship," read the headline. Inside, they detailed how Heartland Made had grown from a garage startup to a multi-million-dollar platform, how we'd created sustainable income for hundreds of rural artisans, and how my unconventional path had led to conventional success. Entrepreneur magazine followed up 3 months later with their own feature calling me the poster child for alternative education paths in business. The validation felt incredible, but more importantly, it was public validation that couldn't be dismissed or minimized by anyone who'd once called my work playing with crafts. The magazine called me Visionary Entrepreneur of the Year. The real breakthrough came when our Series A funding round closed. After months of negotiations with investors who saw the potential in our business model, we secured $12 million in funding that valued Heartland Made at $20 million. $20 million. The same amount Thomas and Jennifer's combined student loans would cost to pay off completely 4 times over. More than my parents had earned in their entire careers combined. More money than anyone in my family had ever seen, or probably ever would see. The college dropout they'd dismissed as uneducated trash had built something worth more than everything they'd ever achieved with all their degrees and credentials combined. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. Our investor announcement made the local business news, then got picked up by national outlets. Forbes included us in their companies to watch list. The Wall Street Journal mentioned our funding round in their weekly startup roundup. Every article mentioned my background as a college dropout who'd built the company from nothing. Every interview included questions about succeeding without formal business education. The narrative was clear. Traditional paths weren't the only paths to success. $20 million doesn't lie about someone's worth. What I didn't know was that my family had been secretly struggling far more than they'd admitted to anyone. Dad's retirement crisis was actually a retirement disaster. His 401k had lost nearly 60% of its value due to poor investment choices, and he was facing the reality of working until he was 70 or older. Mom's medical issues were ongoing and expensive. The $15,000 in bills I'd heard about was just the beginning. Her condition required specialist care and medications that their insurance considered experimental and wouldn't cover. They were looking at another $40,000 in treatment costs over the next 2 years. Thomas had been unemployed for 8 months, not the few months the family had been telling people. His savings were gone, his credit cards were maxed out, and he was facing the possibility of bankruptcy. The engineering degree that was supposed to guarantee financial security had become worthless in a market that valued experience over credentials. Jennifer's debt situation was even worse. The $87,000 in student loans had grown to over $95,000 with interest and late fees. Her job wasn't as secure as she'd pretended, and she was one performance review away from joining Thomas in unemployment. They needed the trash they'd thrown away. But the most revealing discovery came when I learned they'd been researching my success obsessively. Dad had subscriptions to Business Insider and Entrepreneur magazine, publications he'd never read before. Mom had been Googling Heartland Made Revenue and Amanda Peterson Net Worth with the desperation of someone planning a financial rescue mission. They'd printed out articles about my company and kept them in a folder like they were studying for an exam on their estranged daughter's success. Thomas had been following our social media accounts from fake profiles. Jennifer had researched our investor information and calculated what my equity stake might be worth. The family that had dismissed my business as playing with crafts had been tracking every milestone, every achievement, every dollar of revenue, like they were planning to apply for a job with us. They'd been studying my success, like homework they'd failed. The first call came 3 days after the Business Insider article went live. Mom's voice was different, careful, calculated, like she'd rehearsed what she was going to say. "Amanda, honey, I hope you're well. Your father and I saw the article about your company, and we're so proud of what you've accomplished. We've been thinking a lot lately about how things ended between us, and we realize we may have been too hasty in our reaction to your decision." Too hasty. That was her euphemism for 3 years of complete rejection. We know you're probably still hurt by some of the things that were said, but we hope you can understand that we were just worried about your future. We never wanted to lose you from our lives. The calls kept coming. Dad left voicemails about misunderstandings and how family should stick together through difficult times. Thomas sent a text saying he'd always believed in my vision and was sorry for any confusion. Jennifer reached out through LinkedIn of all places, congratulating me on my incredible success and suggesting we catch up soon. The transparent desperation was almost insulting. Not once did anyone acknowledge what they'd actually said or done. Instead, they were rewriting history, turning their cruelty into worry and their rejection into misunderstandings. They wanted to talk about misunderstandings and family I spent weeks thinking about how to respond. Part of me, the part that was still 19 and crying at that dinner table, wanted their approval so badly that I considered forgetting everything that had happened. Maybe I could have the family back, and the success too. Maybe we could all pretend the last 3 years had been some kind of unfortunate miscommunication. But I'd learned too much about myself in those 3 years of silence. I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by their opinion. I'd learned that people who love you don't abandon you the moment you make a choice they disagree with. I'd learned that respect earned through fear isn't respect at all. It's just expedience. They wanted me back now because I was successful, not because they'd realized they were wrong. They wanted access to what I'd built, not to rebuild a relationship with me. The timing of their outreach, immediately after the magazine coverage, made their motivations crystal clear. If they'd truly been sorry, they would have reached out when I was struggling, when I needed them most. Instead, they'd waited until my success was undeniable and public before deciding I was worth their time again. I decided to give them exactly what they'd given me. The perfect opportunity came in the form of Dad's 60th birthday invitation. It arrived in my inbox 6 weeks later, a formal digital invitation to a celebration of William Peterson's 60 years of life and achievement at the country club where he'd once bragged about his membership to impress business contacts. The guest list included extended family friends, business colleagues, and neighbors. Basically everyone who'd heard them talk about their engineer son and MBA daughter while pretending their third child didn't exist. The same people who'd been told I was a college dropout disappointment who'd thrown her life away. It was going to be the perfect stage for some truth-telling. A room full of people who'd heard their version of my story, who'd been told that traditional education was the only path to success, who'd seen me erased from family photos and conversations for 3 years. Dad's 60th birthday would be the ideal venue to show them what uneducated trash had actually accomplished. Dad's birthday would be perfect for some truth-telling. I arrived at Dad's 60th birthday party dressed for success. Designer suit confidence earned through 3 years of building something real and a leather portfolio containing copies of every magazine article, every financial milestone, and every piece of evidence that would make this night memorable for all the wrong reasons. The country club dining room was exactly what I'd expected. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, and a crowd of people who'd heard my family's version of events for the past 3 years. Neighbors, business colleagues, extended family members, who'd been told I was the disappointing daughter who'd thrown her life away for some foolish business dreams. Mom spotted me first, her face lighting up with what looked like genuine relief. Dad hurried over, adjusting his tie, like he was nervous about how this reunion would play out in front of his guests. Thomas and Jennifer flanked them both, looking uncomfortable, but trying to project an image of family unity for the crowd. "Amanda," Mom said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I'm so glad you could make it. Everyone's been asking about you." The irony was perfect. For 3 years I'd been erased from family conversations. Now suddenly everyone had been asking about me. The uneducated trash had arrived in style. The first hour was a masterclass in revisionist history. Dad introduced me to his colleagues as my daughter, the successful entrepreneur, without mentioning that he'd kicked me out for becoming one. Mom told the neighbors about how proud she was of my business achievements, conveniently forgetting she'd called them playing with crafts for years. Thomas cornered me by the bar, attempting what I assumed was his rehearsed reconciliation speech. "I've been following Heartland Made's success," he said. "Really impressive growth trajectory. I always knew you had good business instincts. Really." Because I remember you laughing when I got kicked out for trying to use those instincts." He shifted uncomfortably. "We were all just concerned about your education. You have to admit dropping out seemed risky at the time." Jennifer joined us, wine glass in hand, ready with her own version of family revisionism. "The important thing is that it worked out," she said. "And now we can all move forward as a family. Maybe there are even some synergies between your business and my finance background." Synergies. She was already positioning herself to benefit from what I'd built. Dad kept mentioning alternative paths to success. The moment I'd been waiting for came during Dad's toast. He stood at the head table tapping his wine glass for attention and launched into a speech about family tradition and the importance of supporting your children's dreams. "I've learned over the years that success comes in many forms," he announced to the room. "Sometimes our children surprise us by finding alternative paths to success that we didn't initially understand. I'm proud of all my children. Thomas with his engineering career, Jennifer with her business expertise, and Amanda with her entrepreneurial spirit." The condescension was subtle, but unmistakable. Even in his attempt at reconciliation, he couldn't resist the hierarchy. Thomas and Jennifer had careers and expertise. I had spirit. That's when I stood up. "Thank you for that introduction, Dad. I'd like to say a few words about alternative paths to success." I opened my portfolio and pulled out the Business Insider cover story, holding it up for the room to see. This is what uneducated trash looks like when it makes the cover of Business Insider. Visionary Entrepreneur of the Year, they called me. Not bad for someone who was kicked out of this family for dropping out of college. The room went completely silent. Mom's face had gone white. Dad looked like he wanted to disappear. "For 3 years, you told people I was a disappointment who'd thrown my life away. You erased me from family photos, excluded me from celebrations, and dismissed my business as playing with crafts. But you never told them the real story." I pulled out the funding announcement. Heartland Made is now valued at $20 million. That's more than Thomas and Jennifer's combined student debt 4 times over. More than you'll ever see in retirement, Dad, even if you work until you're 80. Thomas was staring at his plate. Jennifer looked mortified. The extended family was hanging on every word. "The college dropout you called uneducated trash has employed dozens of people, supported hundreds of rural artisans, and built something that Forbes called a company to watch. Meanwhile, your golden children with their precious degrees are living in your basement asking for money." The truth was brutal, but it was time someone said it publicly. I told them exactly what uneducated trash had built. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Dad tried to salvage the situation with nervous laughter and comments about family misunderstandings, but the damage was done. The entire room had heard the real story, how they'd abandoned their daughter for choosing entrepreneurship over education, how she'd succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, and how they'd only tried to reconcile when they needed something from her. Relatives started asking uncomfortable questions. "You really kicked her out for starting a business. She built a $20 million company, and you called her trash. Wait, Thomas is living with you again." Mom pulled me aside, tears in her eyes, begging me to not do this here in front of everyone. But it was too late for damage control. The truth about their treatment of me, their financial struggles, and their desperate attempt at reconciliation was out there for everyone to see. Uncle Jim, Dad's brother, summed it up perfectly as I gathered my things to leave. "Will you threw away a daughter who became a millionaire because she didn't want to go to college? That might be the dumbest thing I've ever heard." $20 million had taught them respect. The fallout from Dad's birthday party was swift and thorough. Within a week, the extended family had chosen sides, and most of them weren't choosing the parents who'd kicked out their millionaire daughter over a college degree. Uncle Jim called Dad directly to tell him he was an idiot who'd thrown away the most successful kid in the family. Aunt Carol started inviting me to family events that Mom and Dad suddenly weren't welcome at. Cousins who'd heard years of stories about the disappointing dropout were now asking for business advice and wondering how they'd been so misinformed. The social consequences were immediate. Dad's reputation at the country club took a hit when word spread about how he'd treated his most successful child. Mom lost friendships with neighbors who couldn't understand why anyone would disown a daughter for building a $20 million company. Thomas finally found a job, but the pay was significantly lower than his previous position. Jennifer's student loan situation grew worse when she had to move back home to save money. Both of them were living with parents who were now openly bitter about their financial support being one-sided. The family that had thrived on image and status found themselves becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing credentials over character. They finally learned the value of what they'd discarded. As for me, I've never slept better. The constant anxiety about earning their approval, the nagging voice that wondered if maybe they were right about my choices, all of it disappeared the night I stood up at that birthday party. Heartland Made continued to grow. We expanded into home goods, added a subscription box service, and started partnering with major retailers who wanted authentic American-made products. Every success felt purely mine. Now, not something I was achieving to prove them wrong, but something I was building because I believed in it. I bought a house, hired more employees, and started mentoring other young entrepreneurs who'd been told their unconventional paths weren't valid. The business magazines kept calling for interviews, and each time they asked about succeeding without traditional education, I thought about that dinner table where I'd been called uneducated trash. The best part, I stopped caring what they thought. Mom still sends occasional texts asking how I'm doing, probably hoping I'll eventually offer financial help for their mounting bills. Dad's retirement crisis deepened when his consulting work dried up. But their struggles weren't my responsibility anymore. I'd learned the most important lesson of all success tastes better when you don't need anyone's permission to enjoy it. Success tastes better when you don't need anyone's permission.